Recovery Sort Of is a podcast where we discuss recovery topics from the perspective of people living in long-term recovery. This podcast does not intend to represent the views of any particular group, organization, or fellowship. The attitudes expressed are solely the opinion of its contributors. Be advised, there may be strong language or topics of an adult nature.
Welcome back. It's Recovery Sort Of. I'm Jason, a guy who can't wait to talk about anonymity.
And I'm Billy. I'm a person in long-term recovery.
And it's Tradition 12. And the only exciting thing about this for me is that we don't have to do it next month.
We're done the tradition.
Oh, thank God. Thank God. So, Tradition 12. It's anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all our traditions, ever reminding us to place principles before personalities. What in the hell does that mean? Anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all our traditions. So I guess anonymity is a spiritual principle of being anonymous. And it always is supposed to keep in mind for us that we place these spiritual principles before other people's personalities. But what does that even mean? Like, what is...
The way I understand it is that we are encouraged... supposed to, if you want to use that word. I know we're not supposed to do anything, but we are encouraged, expected, wanted to try to place the needs of the whole ahead of our own individual needs. That our own individual wants and desires and beliefs should not overcome the needs of the groups.
So when it says ever reminding us to place principles before personalities, does that mean our own personality? Like we're supposed to place the principles and what's best for the group above our own personal wants and needs?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
That is never how I've read that before. I've thought of that as like being a good person even when other people are dicks.
Maybe that too, but yeah.
Huh.
But I should be working within the group to try to serve the group. I mean, again, this stuff is predicated on the idea that everyone is doing the same thing, not that you have one guy that comes in and acts like a dick and runs the meeting poorly, so that's what everybody does because they're putting their group's needs ahead of their own. Like, not that. You're predicating that on the idea that everyone is bringing that, spirit to the discussion.
One of the things I found fascinating that's a little off topic from this tradition is on YouTube, we got a comment on one of our tradition episodes. It was either 8 or 9, I can't remember. Maybe even 10. Who the fuck knows at this point? It all runs together. But they were like, I thought you were going to have more program-based information, and I don't remember the exact quote, but something about, I thought you were going to be more specific with the program literature, and there's this guiding principles book, and you guys should read the literature and really figure this out. And I was like, everything we said is like taken from the literature. It's straight out of the basic text and it works out why. So that's interesting. And what made me wonder was, does the guiding principles workbook like deviate from our original text? I have no idea. I haven't read it, but it did make me question that.
Yeah. I don't think it deviates. It does go a little deeper into each of the principles and, each of the traditions and spiritual principles that are in them. Maybe they feel like we're missing some or not discussing some in a way that it specifically says in the book. I mean, our literature at least says that, our hard-won experience gave birth to the traditions, and it is only through understanding and application that they work. So most of my understanding has been through years of service work and being involved and actual doing it, not necessarily just what I read in a book somewhere. I guess that's my snarky way of saying get involved and do some service and then figure out what your ideas are.
Sounded like Billy gave him the middle finger, whoever that was. I don't know.
Justification.
I commented back something along the lines of like, most of this episode is straight out of the literature, but whatever. It was just an interesting thing to me. I didn't get hugely offended by it or nothing. I didn't care enough to get offended, honestly. It's like tradition
Yeah.
episodes suck.
Well, I heard Jimmy K, and I'd have to find it. I have it on one of my speaker tapes or CDs somewhere, say that all this talking about traditions and steps does not serve the fellowship and is actually makes it more complicated and confusing than it needs to be.
Huh.
So all this new literature and stuff maybe isn't the best thing.
Oh, well, there you
Maybe
go.
it's easier to keep it simple and apply it in basic terms and make it easy.
Just be honest and show up. A dictionary definition of anonymity is a state of bearing no name. In keeping with tradition 12, the I becomes we. The spiritual foundation becomes more important than any one group or individual. So that's one of the first pieces out of the basic text version of this. The spiritual foundation becomes more important than any one group or individual. It's hard to picture where this is going to be profoundly infused into anything that I've ever done. Like nothing I've ever seen or witnessed really placed the, again, this kind of goes back to the last episode talking about feeling like I need to protect NA or something. Like, yeah, there've been some things that I thought, well, that's kind of shitty, or that's just all about that guy, that home group, right? That's all about what he wants to do in that meeting. But none of it I ever thought was like, oh my God, NA is going to fall apart if we let this go. Like, I've never thought that like any one group or individual was going to tear NA apart, honestly.
I don't know that I ever felt that a group was going to tear the fellowship apart. I will say we had, and I've talked about this before, but it was one group with 2 meetings a week that took on this attitude that if you were smoking cigarettes or drinking coffee that you were using and that you weren't clean. And
Right.
they shared that openly in their meetings and would say things like you need to get a white key tag and things like that. And it was very contradictory from everything that I understood, that was not the basis of the fellowship. But anyway, and they were on the meeting schedule and we were sending people to that meeting. And I didn't know that it was going to tear the fellowship apart. But what I thought most directly for me was imagine coming out of treatment with no days clean or, whatever, 30 days clean, whatever, getting out of treatment, coming home and hitting that as one of your first meetings or one of your early meetings and being like, oh, that's what NA's about? Fuck that. Like, I'm going to smoke cigarettes and drink coffee. Like, that's fucking crazy. And, that was always my fear. What is it? If that's your introduction or your takeaway from that meeting as a representation of Narcotics Anonymous, that from everything I understood was wrong anyway, we should be trying to do something to stop that.
But NA's stance was no.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, I mean, they said it was really up to our area whether we decided to have a meeting on our schedule or not. And, they didn't have a hard stance on that our area makes up whatever guidelines for having a meeting on your schedule. It was really up to the area.
So all the groups in an area can vote a group out.
So you can't close a group.
Right. But
we would not have been able to stop them from existing.
You can vote it out of the
area. That was
the
one thing they did tell us. Yeah. So you can't, and this is now my understanding. That wasn't my understanding at the time, but my understanding now is you can't vote them out of the area because the area is there to serve the groups. Like it's, the earlier tradition says we may create service boards or committees directly responsible to those they serve. We have another tradition that says our leaders are but trusted servants. They do not govern. So these are people that are of positions of service. They're not in positions of authority or governance. So that group can exist. And by all my understandings now, back then it was very different. Back then I was wholeheartedly, fuck that group. We should shut them down. We should take them off the schedule. And again, that was based in this idea that people are going to die as a direct result of getting this misinformation. So I just thought we needed to do something to stop them from quote unquote killing people with this bad information that they had.
It was interesting coming up here and seeing in the Susquehanna area service that when a new meeting shows up to area service and says we want to be a new meeting, we just say welcome. Hey, go get a newcomer packet from literature or whatever. And coming from the Northeast Freedom area, they take a vote about a new meeting joining the area. Whether that's a newly established meeting or a meeting coming from another area into the area, they have to vote to decide that, which seems contrary to what you just explained, that they don't have the ability to do that. The groups decide what the fuck they want.
Yeah, and my understanding of all of that is, I guess the only thing that you're technically allowed to approve them for is addition to your meeting schedule. Like if you have a service board, whoever it is, in our case it's our literature committee that makes up meeting lists, that subcommittee is directly responsible to the groups that it serves. So if the groups say, hey, we want to make sure that a meeting at least meets 3 months in a row or whatever criteria you put on before we add them to the schedule, that's one thing. But you shouldn't have the ability to keep them from meeting or approve them from meeting, or, you know what I mean? Like, they can still show up there and meet and call themselves NA meeting, and your subcommittees are responsible to try to serve them in any way that they can.
So they could always just send a GSR to area, even if you don't vote them into the area.
Correct.
And they can vote. They have a valid vote.
In my understanding, they should. Yeah, I mean, there's probably some technicalities about if the groups have to. Because I was talking about some of that with my wife. It's like, what do you do if you're a service board or committee directly responsible to those you serve, but then the people that you serve tell you to do something that is contradictory to traditions or principles? Like, well, what do you do? Do you serve them, or do you allow your higher principles to say? I said I would probably step down or quit, or say I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, and it says in like the explanation of what the job of the GSR is at area service is that, look, your home group elected you to carry the information back to the group from area and from the group to area, but it also states in there specifically, like, you're also elected to basically follow tradition 12 and benefit the program or the fellowship as a whole, and not to act in ways that are contradictory to that are just beneficial for one or two groups.
Right.
So it like kind of says, like, use your best judgment. Don't, bring a vote here from your group about, this group should get like star treatment or something. Like
right.
That's not a thing. And so it's just fascinating that all that.
But, and that's, like that approval of groups is, I'm going to say, somewhat new. It's not that new, but it wasn't always that way. There was a process where and I believe that was, again, just brought up and discussed within that service committee, where it was like, we don't have a right to tell people they got to jump through these hoops or do these things to start a meeting. Like, if you show up and you want to start a Narcotics Anonymous meeting, our fucking attitude should be welcome. Thanks for showing up. What can we do to serve you? What can we do to help your meeting be successful? That should be our idea, not, wait a minute, do you have blah, blah, blah? Do you have some money to start? Do you have, all that shit? Like, that is not our responsibility.
Well, and that's definitely what it was in Northeast Freedom area. Now that you say that, it was like, do you have your positions filled? Do you have, like, right. Who gives a fuck? Right. Interestingly, so you could keep them off of the area's, schedule, which would in turn in 2021 keep them off of the internet's schedule for the area.
Right.
But if it still works the same way, and it's been fucking 15 years at least since I've done this, but if World still works the same way, they could contact World and get put on as the person who runs that group or the contact person for that group, and have it entered into World's database of meetings, which would come up on the NA Meeting Finder app, whether your area approved of them or not.
That is correct, yeah.
Huh.
They could still be on World as a meeting.
Wow. Interesting. All right, moving on. As we find ourselves growing closer together, the awakening of humility occurs. Humility is a byproduct that allows us to grow and develop in an atmosphere of freedom and removes the fear of becoming known by our employers, families, or friends as addicts. Therefore, we attempt to rigorously adhere to the principle that what is said in meetings stays in meetings. I get what they're trying to say in here, and I don't like the way they say it. I think we talked about this a couple weeks ago. Like, what you see here, what you hear here, let it stay here. Like, I think what you hear in meetings is supposed to leave the meeting with you. It's just not who said it or who it's about. Like, you don't leave in a gossip way with that information. Like, oh, so-and-so did such and such. But, like, the good information I heard in the room, in the meeting, was supposed to be what I carried out of there to practice in my life, I thought.
Yeah, and I've had interesting discussions with people about the idea that if you and I are friends with someone else and that someone else shares in a meeting that they're going through struggles, that should I come and tell you what they said in the meeting? Should we talk about that? Like, and my understanding of that has sort of been, yes, if it's coming from a spirit of like love and care and concern, and I know you're a person that knows that person well or that has connection with them, or we know a friend that needs support, like, hey man, he's going through a really fucking rough time, he shared his fucking wife left or whatever, maybe you can reach out to him, see how he's doing, it'd probably help. Like, I don't think that is the spirit of this what you hear here, let it stay here idea. I believe that's meant more outside of meetings and in a public space. It's like, again, I talked about it a week or two ago. I had someone show up at my work to get someone a job, and then shows up at my work like, hey, this is a person that's in recovery like us, and this kind of shit. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, people here don't know me in that way. I mean, and I wasn't ashamed or embarrassed or anything, but that's not what that environment is. Like, it's my fucking job where I'm a supervisor at work. I don't need, people to know anything about my personal business like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I've always gotten around it by just, when in that friend situation, just saying, hey, I think so-and-so is going through something. It'd probably be cool if you gave him a call. Right. So I'm like, I didn't really say anything. I just kind of gave the gist of the situation. But yeah, it is really a lot about motives and what are you doing it for?
And some stuff's tricky. I mean, like, you and I have had plenty of conversations about some pretty intimate stuff. And then I don't always know, like, I have to think real hard sometimes to myself, like, because I'll talk to my wife to get her input and advice on different things and ideas. I mean, she's a great resource in my recovery. But then I have to try to think, like, oh, is that something that was said in confidence, or is that something that's more general information that's been like shared in a meeting and things that you've talked about that you don't care about? And that can get tricky, like, because you never want to violate someone's intimate, stuff. So it's tough. And then again, nowadays I know better than to think that I have all the answers or that my fucking opinion is the best. Like, sometimes I need some other people to give me insight and advice on things, and
I'll clear it up for you, and I'll take the onus. I don't think anything's private. I don't give a fuck. Share whatever anywhere. It doesn't.
Well, for you, I mean, that might. I'm just saying in general, though, with other people that I sponsor or other friends, that might say some things to me.
Well, and I think it is tricky. I mean, I don't want everybody to know everything about my life, and at the same time, like, I think that comes from a place of the fact that we shame people and we belittle people about ways they live their life that might not be the norm. And I want to move away from that to a place of like just accepting that we don't have to keep shit behind closed doors. Like, it's all okay. Like, that's my stance, and I guess I got to live that way first. So it's not always comfortable, but yeah, fuck it, share whatever. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to hide behind it. If I live it, I do it.
So in that context, it's okay. But what if someone went to your work and said those things? Like, that might be different.
No. I carry myself this way pretty much everywhere. Like, I say I'm going to keep to myself. I'm not going to tell those work people my shit. And then I'll sit there and fucking babble on about all my shit. And
so in general, I'm that way too. People at work probably think I'm fucking crazy because I say all kinds of stuff all the time. I don't care about sharing a lot about my history or all the crazy shit I did on drugs or stuff I do nowadays, when I make mistakes, or like, I have become pretty transparent in that stuff.
Yeah, and I'm thankful to have a place in my life where, like, my work, I don't feel like there might be some judgment or some behind closed doors, like, oh my God, did you hear that? Like, but I I'm not going to outwardly feel a whole lot of that or get punished
Yeah,
or
right.
fired or over it. Like, I'm sure there's environments where that is a problem, and I would not like to live that way.
Right. But in general, I don't ever, outside of meetings specifically, like I don't ever. I mean, we have cases where I know people in meetings and then I see them in environments outside of meetings and people be like, oh, how do you know so-and-so? And it'll be like, oh, we're friends. We met somewhere. A lot of times I'll say through my wife, and that's just a cop out because my wife was in recovery longer than me. So most of the people that she knows that we know, she's known before me.
Right.
So it's easy to say, oh, I met him through my wife. That gives me a good out from saying we go to these weird 12-step fellowship meetings.
Yeah. Well, this happens outside of our program too. So like I, got into a local union, and I would be like, they'd be like, who you know, when I'm working with people, who do you know in the union? And I talk and blah, blah, blah. And they're like, oh, how do you know so-and-so? And like, I met him in prison. They don't want me to tell everybody that. Like, that was kind of low key for them. So it was like, oh man, we're just old friends or some bullshit. But yeah, this isn't just an NA specific thing. Like, this is elsewhere too. And it is tricky, right? When people have things that they don't want the world to know about in certain arenas, and like, I just personally, whatever, like, here I am, this is it. And not always, but more so today, like, I don't give a fuck, whatever.
And in the spirit of anonymity, it's like you said, am I gossiping about a person? Am I just coming to you to say, oh man, did you hear so-and-so is fucking cheating on his wife with so-and-so? That motherfucker's, he's
that's
a mess.
Probably way more interesting than anything else anyway.
Right. But the point of that is that really serving that group? Is that really serving the fellowship as a whole? Or is that just serving me, trying to get me some sort of, points or whatever with you? And
it's so fun to share that shit. And sometimes it's just like, I just need somewhere to talk about this crazy shit that happened. For instance, and this has nothing to do with me or anything else, and it's all in the news, so whatever. There was a rock concert that just happened over this past weekend or something. And some lady from this band that like plays, they play like orchestra covers of rock music or something, but she's the lead singer. And apparently during the middle of their fucking set, she invited some dude on stage and literally pulled down her pants and pissed on his face. Like, it's the craziest shit I've ever seen. Right. So I was like, I was in such bafflement and shock from it that I had to share it with people. And it wasn't like I wanted to gossip about her, like whatever, that's some weird shit, but I'm not judging, right? But it was just like, I can't believe this happened, and I got to tell people about it. And so I'm always looking for like a safe people that I can do that with, that it's not going to negatively impact the person, but it's like, I got this information. I want to talk about it because it's so fucking weird to me. And when somebody like some crazy shit happened where the guy who's been with his wife for 20 years is cheating on her with a newcomer and got caught, and he's got pictures of himself in women's panties being sent around to people. Like, I got to talk about that somewhere. Like, I can't just keep it all to myself.
Yeah, and I guess I've been in situations, I'm going to say similar, not necessarily that specifically. I don't know anybody peeing in anybody's face or whatever, but I've had situations where I can go to people, my sponsor or other people, and say, like, I can keep it anonymous by saying I have a sponsee that's going through this, or I have a friend that's going through this, and I don't have to name specific names. And I mean, we all know that obviously we want to know who they're talking about, because when people come to me and say that shit, the first thing I want to go is, well, who the fuck is it?
Right.
I want to know. But I try to practice this principle of anonymity and think, well, I'm just going to try to not, I'm not going to feed into that, try to guess who it is. Can I get 3 guesses?
Right. Do they have a beard?
Right.
How about blonde hair?
And luckily, the men that I've had in my recovery have honored that as well. I've never felt pressured to be like, well, who is it? Is it my wife?
Oh my God, we're so off topic. We're done talked about pissing on people's faces at concerts and everything else. Throughout our traditions, we speak in terms of we and our rather than me and mine. By working together for our common welfare, we achieve the true spirit of anonymity. It sounds so nice and pleasant. I don't know that I have any thoughts about it, but it just sounds so nice.
Well, we, as in you and I, have gotten a little bit of grief from sharing as we and us.
Right. That's what my goddamn traditions told me to do.
So, we got permission from this tradition to speak as us as a fellowship.
There you go.
But yeah, that's another one of those tricky, things of like, am I sharing my individual opinion or am I trying to represent the fellowship as a whole? There's some.
It is tricky because we're taught to speak in we in our program. It's very much like we talk about we all the time. One of the things I had heard about this tradition at some point or read somewhere was that this idea of anonymity, it's not so much about being anonymous in the sense of you not knowing who I am or that I go to meetings. It's more doing service in the spirit of anonymity, right? This idea that like I do service without expecting any recognition, or it's not about the fact that I did service, it's the fact that service got done and people were helped, right?
Right.
This idea of anonymity, which I thought was, when I heard it, pretty cool. It sounded way better than the whole, nobody knows our names or whatever. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, and I've definitely worked on focusing on that spirit of anonymity. When you look at each of the traditions, none of them really talks about, the anonymity of not talking about people outside of meetings and gossip. Like
Right.
The spirit of anonymity that we talk about through our traditions is about, having a loving God that directs us through our group conscience and working in a spirit of unity and, our primary purpose being to carry a message to addicts that still suffer. Like it's all in a we sense. I don't know why we put so much emphasis on this. Don't talk about who's in meetings.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, that is an important piece. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
I think that's important, but that is not the spiritual foundation of all of our traditions.
Right.
The spiritual foundation of all of our traditions is the we part.
Yeah, that's kind of like how in 7, we look basically as fully self-supporting. We only think of money.
Right.
Like, we don't think all the other ways we're fully self-supporting, which is another interesting episode if you want to go back and listen to that. So this says, we have heard the phrase principles before personalities so often that it is like a cliche. While we may disagree as individuals, the spiritual principle of anonymity makes us all equal as members of the group. No member is greater or lesser than any other member. The drive for personal gain in the areas of sex, property, and social position, which brought so much pain in the past, falls by the wayside if we adhere to the principle of anonymity. Anonymity is one of the basic elements of our recovery, and it pervades our traditions and our fellowship. It protects us from our own defects of character and renders personalities and their differences powerless. Anonymity in action makes it impossible for personalities to come before principles. Yeah, that's a lot, but what does it mean? The drive for personal gain in the areas of sex, property, and social position falls by the wayside if we adhere to the principle of anonymity.
I think it's just looking at each other as human beings. You know what I mean? We come in. It doesn't necessarily matter how successful you are or how big your house is or how, successful your career is. Like when you come into a Narcotics Anonymous meeting, you're expected to just be equal to everyone else in the room. We don't have leaders, we don't have people in charge.
Right.
Tying back to our spokesman and all that stuff.
Right. Yeah, and I'm thinking like if you're living in the spirit of anonymity, if I'm showing up to be the area chair just because the area chair position needs to be filled and I want to be of service. Okay, cool. If I'm trying to be the area chair because I think it's going to get me laid or because people are going to hold me to a higher social position or whatever, like that's, I think, what it's saying. Like if I'm doing it for those reasons, I'm going to act in ways that try to bring attention to myself as area chair. Whereas if I'm just doing it to be a service, it's really not about me. And hopefully nobody even notices that I'm the one standing up there. I'm just filling the position to be of service.
Right. And for myself, like and maybe this is a cop-out, this may be my excuse, but I've had to watch getting in positions of authority in service commitments because I do tend to start thinking I know what's best and I'm in charge. And I think I'm a smart person. I think I'm good at leadership.
Right.
So I think highly of myself. And that can be a dangerous place for me. So what I tend to do in service now, like most recently when I showed up and got involved, is I walked in a room, I kind of looked around, I went and sat at a table, I figured out what needed to be done and said, okay, I'll do that. And I don't go in with an agenda or an attitude. I just show up with a willingness to serve. And if ever I was going to say I let God take the wheel and steer where it needs to steer, like that's the case where I show up and wherever fate, happenstance, whatever you want to call it, like that's what guides me, not like you said, well, I want to be in a position that's going to get a lot of authority. I want to be someone who's going to get noticed. I want to be the person that's going to have a lot of say. Like, no, I don't want, I mean, I want all those things. I got to watch because that's not a healthy place for me to be.
I don't feel like being a service I've had that issue, but with sharing at meetings, I've definitely, from day one, you hear a good share and you're like, I want to be the guy up there. It sounds like that, right? And I have fallen into this fantasy of like, I'm going to share these conventions and like after my share, bras and panties are going to rain down from the audience onto me. Like that has never happened. And I've been so disappointed. I'm like, it was a good message. Where's nobody brought me a bouquet of flowers afterwards or nothing. And yeah, so I have to watch my own bullshit because I'll be like, oh my God, I sound so good up there. I should be, celebrated in some kind of way in this anonymous program. And that's something that somebody pointed out early on. It's crazy to try to be someone in an anonymous program. And I think that's kind of the spirit of this 12th tradition, right? Like we're not trying to be anyone special in the fellowship. We're just trying to be of service and give back.
Yeah, and understanding that there's like a freedom that I get from that of saying, you know what? I am just as good as anyone else, whether I share at that podium or not. I am just as important and worthwhile and a valued member as the guy that does share at the World Convention main speaker meeting. I mean, and I think we all say that and then snicker because that's not the feeling that in general that exists. But that's the spirit that it should be, is that, I am not great at everything, nor do I need to be to earn my place here or to have my seat here or have value in this fellowship.
Well, I share again in 9 days, so there's still a chance. Still a chance it could happen.
This episode has been brought to you in part by Voices of Hope, Inc., a nonprofit recovery organization made up of people in recovery, family members, and allies. Together, members strive to protect the dignity of those that use drugs and those in recovery by advocating for treatment, harm reduction and support resources, and mentoring. Please visit us at www.voicesofhopemaryland.org and consider donating to our cause.
In personal recovery, we seek to replace self-will with the guidance of a higher power in our personal affairs. See, and this isn't the whole statement, but I got to stop here. It's so hard for me to think of just spiritual principles in the place of a higher power when they make statements like this. I'm always like, how can you not think that means God? In personal recovery, we seek to replace self-will with the guidance of a higher power in our personal affairs. So I guess, yeah, like the higher power is just, I'm just going to live in these principles no matter what the hell I think or no matter what I want.
Yep. So trying to balance out things like, well, I think this is the right approach to this, problem, but the group doesn't seem to think it's the right approach to this problem. So, do I just trust in the spiritual principle of autonomy and go along and support the group? Or do I try to buck?
Interesting. All right. So in personal recovery, we seek to replace self-will with the guidance of a higher power in our personal lives. In the same way, the traditions describe a fellowship that takes its collective guidance from spiritual principles rather than individual personalities. That kind of selflessness is what the 12th tradition means by the word anonymity, and it is the spiritual foundation upon which Narcotics Anonymous is built. Tradition 12 is all the traditions rolled up in one, summarizing and reinforcing the message of the previous 11. I mean, what that tells me is you have to go back and listen to all 11 tradition episodes that we did in order to understand this more fully. That's interesting. So it's almost like they're saying that the traditions describe a fellowship that takes its collective guidance from spiritual principles rather than individual personalities. It's almost like people who don't necessarily have a specific God, who use the spiritual principles as their higher power or way to establish what is right for them. that's kind of what the fellowship does in the traditions, right? So it's almost like people who don't really necessarily have a specific God are using the way the fellowship uses traditions and the spiritual principles to guide it in their own life as their higher power. That's interesting.
Right. That we're going to just trust in the process of principles, as being our guiding force.
And the last quote I have about it, which I think these tradition episodes are definitely making for our shortest episodes ever. And I only wrote this in here because it just seems so contrary to everything that I've ever seen. Almost all our groups, service boards, and committees rotate different members through their service positions, rarely asking one individual to serve in a particular position of responsibility more than 1 or 2 terms in a row. The practice of rotation emphasizes our fellowship's belief in the value of anonymity in service. I have heard this idea, like you should turn that over to somebody else. You don't want the committee or the position to take on your personality. And yet that is not what I have seen in service ever. I have seen in my old area, there was definitely like the area chair was the area chair like 5 fucking years straight. In our current area, our treasurer has been treasurer for like 8 years or something crazy. Like, we do not rotate because nobody wants to step the fuck up to do anything.
Well, I would say it's not true that no one wants to step up to do it, because I will only ever hold a position for 2 terms. And I don't know where I got this from. I would love to say that I took it out of there, but I didn't. I was like, I'll do 2 terms, and then I quit. I mean, I don't consider it quitting. I fulfilled my
Resign.
2 terms. Yeah. And I remember I was a literature chair at one point, and I had no other people on the committee. It was just me, and I took care of all the literature, and I would tell them my term is up in July, I think it is. And I said, in August, I'm not doing this. So if no one steps up, the boxes will be here in the cabinet. And I said, might be here doing something else, but I am not doing this after August. And I didn't, and it happened. And someone else showed up and someone did it. It's kind of like, I think as members, sometimes we have a responsibility to step out of positions and trust that a loving God is going to fill those positions, if you want to look at it this way. Or maybe if no one is willing to do it, it's not a need. No one ever wants to look at that. We never want to look at, well, maybe if we have this going on and it's not getting the support or the direct, participation that we want, maybe it's because it's not serving in the way that it should.
That's fascinating, and I don't totally disagree, but I want to go further with it. Which committee do we not need? Like, which committee could you be okay with it just dissolving? And like, if nobody would step up to do
doesn't mean there's not a need for the community. What it means is, so if we create a service board or committee directly responsible to whom it serves, and then none of the people that it serves show up to participate in its involvement, then they don't want that committee. You know what I mean? Like, it's an indirect...
I get the theory,
but it doesn't mean there. So I will say, it doesn't mean there's not a need. It doesn't mean, do I think we need a phone line? Yeah, but if we aren't willing to show up and do the work to carry out a phone line, then we don't need a fucking phone line because we're not willing to do the work necessary. Good ideas fucking happen all the time. It's the work and the effort that goes into enacting good ideas, that is required to make things happen.
I don't know, though. I'm just trying to picture, like, would I be able to sit back and watch, like, H&I fold because nobody shows up to carry meetings into hospitals and institutions? Like, that seems like such a fundamental...
So we currently have, or did have, now after COVID, things are all crazy, but we have serviced meetings outside of our immediate area because other areas weren't willing or able. And so the same thing could happen if we dissolved one of these, like, for example, I'm just using phone line. I don't know, if they are overly great or not, or I shouldn't say overly great. I don't know if they're overly supported or not, how they're, how they're feeling in their position of service. But if we just said, look, we can't fill these positions, we don't have the manpower, the willingness, then someone else you would think would take those responsibilities, And if not, it was a pain pain motivates change. Like maybe some people would get motivated to be like, oh shit, no one's going to do it? Really? Like, I think it's a great idea when someone else does it, but I'm not willing to do it.
I'm looking at like public relations. I'm like, not that they don't do more than this, but I feel like generally what they mostly do is just drop pamphlets off at places. I'm like, I could probably go away and I wouldn't give too much of a fuck.
All right.
I don't know that anybody's reading that pamphlet in a, probation center and thinking, oh, this is the answer.
So I'd like to say I was involved in public relations and we did a little more than that.
Yeah,
The idea was a little different.
I think more has been done at different times. I just don't hear a lot about anything more happening now.
Right. And that is part of the reason for the need for change in some of these positions. You know what I mean? It's just new ideas. And the fact that, when I was chair of literature or chair of PR or whatever, like, just because I did it one way doesn't mean that was the right way or the best way. Obviously other people have stepped in at different times and done things differently. And I mean, even within our subcommittees in our area, different positions have changed. Committees have taken on different responsibilities that used to be in this subcommittee or that subcommittee. And that's the whole point of the autonomy. Like, what we should be focused on first and foremost is, are we best serving this need in the way that we're doing it? Or do we just hang on to some rigid structure and ideology because that's what exists and now we feel like we have to?
Yeah, I mean, at least the current PR people, while they're dropping off their pamphlets, aren't like sharing any scared straight programs or nothing. No, it's a cool tradition. I like the idea that the goal or the aim is to not better myself in any way through the service I'm doing. It's really just about, this is a job that needs to get done, and I'm willing to step up and help facilitate that job getting done for an amount of time. I've always been willing, going back to this idea of like rotating people, I've always been willing when there is newer members, like in a home group level, like, oh, hey, I've been secretary for a while, or I've been GSR for a while. Oh, we got newer members? Yeah, well, you guys need positions. Like, I need to step back out of that. And maybe I can take on a different position, or if they're all filled, maybe I don't need to. Maybe I can do something else to serve the meeting, right? Maybe I can pick up supplies for the coffee or something. But I have always been hesitant. Like, I understand the draw to, well, nobody's stepping up. I guess I better do it so that it gets done because I want the job to get done. But I think you're right. Maybe not at a home group level when you have a small home group and there's nobody else to step up. Maybe you can't step out of that after one or two cycles. But at an area level, I have seen many times where it takes the person saying, I'm not doing this anymore in order for somebody else to step up and do it.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, at least for me, it's just having faith in this process that I don't need to be in charge and involved and have my say so directly into shit, that it's going to happen and it's going to exist and it's going to be what it is in spite of me or with me or, whatever. And that I'm just a very small grain of sand in a beach full of effort, and trying to keep that perspective.
I feel like that is probably, like, if you stopped doing the service work in that particular spot for that reason, that's beautiful, right? But I feel like most of the time what happens is people just can't do that shit anymore. Like, I have done this for 5 fucking years. I am just not doing it next year. Like, and somebody else will.
So that is more one of the motivations that I have stepped out of service positions when I have. What I used to do early on, and again, I had kids and a wife and a job and was busy as shit. And so I would say, all right, I'll take a service position for 2 years, and then I step out for a year, take a year off, and then after a year, sometimes a little longer because it's hard to get back in sometimes, I'm going to go back and get a service commitment again because I didn't want to develop resentment and attitude, and I didn't want that subcommittee or service to be either my identity or the identity of that committee. You know what I mean? Like, it's dangerous for both. It's dangerous for me and it's dangerous for them.
Yeah, when you come in, you have all these fresh ideas, you're excited, you're pumped, you're motivated, and then after time, you put some of those ideas into practice and you're pretty happy with where it's at, and it does get stale.
3
It's
years
like,
in, you're pissed off because they're not giving you the money that you need, and nobody's
Right.
showing up, and these fucking people, you know?
and you're just not as motivated anymore.
Right.
You don't have new ideas. You've already changed the shit you wanted to change for the most part, or saw why you couldn't.
Yeah, and now it's time for someone else to come in with their new ideas and change things and do things differently. And then to be on the other side of that and to sit back and watch some of the things that you've done be changed and not be resentful about that. Or to take a little bit of slight from that. You know, it's humbling.
It is. I have seen people change my shit after they came into my position. I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with you? That was great.
Right.
I am very thankful. Not that I wouldn't do this area chair position for a little longer, but I'm very thankful that there's already somebody that, I'm pretty sure wants to take it next year. So it's like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
You can have it. I will step down gladly.
I mean, service is to do service from a very spiritual place is difficult. It's incredibly difficult. I think not just in 12-step fellowships or whatever, I just think in general.
Right.
I think you see it a lot with people in volunteer positions, in, whatever, healthcare workers, in addictions counseling, in regular counseling, therapies and stuff. Like, it is hard to be in a position of serving others for a long time. Like, I think it's not a natural state for most people. And I think it's, for me, I start to get resentful and jealous. I mean, I do that with my own kids sometimes. I'm like, these ungrateful fucking assholes. Like, you're
bastards.
right. Right. And I can get that way about anything. Like, these people take me for granted. I show up and do a great job. Don't they see? I'm the best chair that they've had in years. And they're giving me shit because they didn't get a fucking report on before the meeting. Just dumb shit like that you start to get sort of resentful over something stupid.
Any other thoughts about this? Anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all our traditions, ever reminding us to place principles before personalities. I guess that's just like, hey, this isn't about you. This is just about making everything run in a way that's beneficial to the still suffering addict or, the person who needs the help, or this is just about showing up and trying to be of service and give back.
Yeah. The only other thing I thought was, I've heard this same idea of anonymity expressed in how we introduce ourselves at meetings and what we call ourselves and in the language that as an experienced member, I don't need to be putting all these unique twists and spins on the way I,
I'm a dressed up human garbage can named Jason.
Right. That, I should be doing that in all my affairs within the fellowship. I should be trying to be as unnoticed and center of attention as I can, and that if I'm doing that, that is really serving in a position of anonymity. Not that we don't use our skills and abilities that we have. Again, some people are great speakers. Some people are good at connecting with people, but it's that point that it's not about me being the center of attention. It's about, trying to help others feel connected, to feel part of a whole, for me to be part of a whole.
It talked about that in the literature, and I didn't pull that piece out because it didn't seem all that relevant. But yeah, the idea that, like, the old saying, there's no big I's and little U's, right? It's not about me, but they also don't want us to think that it's like we all need to be grayed out and opinionless. Like, it is our personalities and our diversity that's our strength. So we still want to have that, but it's not about how great I am. It's just about, oh, this is the way I do it. Oh, that's the way you do it. How cool, right? Maybe we can find some way that this works for both of us. Or maybe when I'm in service, I'll do it this way. And when you're in service, you'll do it that way. And that'll benefit different populations through that. Like, it's interesting because when you say it's about anonymity, like at the beginning of that sounds like, oh yeah, we all need to be these dull, hey, how you doing? How's the weather? All right, see you around. Like, and that's not the goal. The goal is not to be grayed out or opinionless. It's just to not seek, I don't know, money, property, and prestige. What is it called? Sex and social, prosperity. Like, not to seek any of those things for us. It's just to be of benefit to the many.
Yeah. And so I would like to say in my personal life, I use this idea a lot more now than ever. And we talked about it a little bit in the work episode. Like, at my job now, we have, work meetings once a month. I'm the supervisor. I pull everyone together. Hey, this is what's going on. Catch them up on everything. These are some problems that we're having. Does anybody have any input? Does anybody have anything that you'd like to say? And allowing other people to have, I don't want to say as much. I mean, I'm still the final authority a lot of times at work, but people appreciate being heard, being listened to, feeling like what they have to say matters, and trying to talk to them as human beings. Like, yeah, I mean, I'm in charge, but I don't push that in their face. Like, well, you do what I say because I said to do it. It's like,
Right.
no, what's your idea? And then we'll talk about that idea and go, well, here's one of the problems with that. This is kind of why we have to do it this way, or this is why we approach that this way. Maybe we can think a little differently and try to figure out how to overcome this. But, this is why we're doing what we're doing now. And that helps tremendously with just interpersonal connections. Again, we're here to serve. At my job, we're here to serve the whole. We're here to make the company successful. We're here to make everybody's life a little bit better, including the employees. It's not a hierarchy where I need to punch down on people and rule over with an iron fist. Like, that doesn't work, or at least in my experience, that hasn't worked so well.
Right.
And those ideas to have that humility have come from being involved in service.
So there you go. Hopefully, throughout this year, we have made the traditions a little less painful to comprehend and think about and study. And hopefully, we'll come up with some good plan for each month next year. Until then, see you next week. Did you like this episode? Share it with people you think might get something out of it. Check out the rest of our episodes at recoverysortof.com. Also, while you're there, you can find ways to link up with us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, YouTube, anything. We're always looking for new ideas. Got an idea you want us to look into? Reach out to us.